So welcome once again. And today we're going to talk about explanations in linguistic typology. So as for the program of the course, actually the program that was there on the web page was correct, but I forgot to change that in the slides last time. So this is a very important bit of information, namely our next lecture, which is going to be by Anne-Marie Verkerk on quantitative approaches to sociolinguistic typology, is going to be on Friday, but it is our only meeting that is not from 6 to 7:30. It's actually from 2 to 3:30. So this is in the afternoon and not in the evening. So please make sure that that's when you join us. If you can't, then as usual, the recording is going to become available soon after the lecture. But if you want to be there and follow us online and ask questions, then it's from 2 to 3:30. And while we're on it, actually, I would like to recommend a short video by Anne-Marie. What is linguistic typology? Here is a link, and you will receive it in the slides, and you can also Google that. So this is a very, very short overview, basically half an hour of what typology is. And this is what we are doing right now, but this is also another view than what I am presenting to some extent. And you might want to take a look at it later, maybe, or share with your friends. I don't know. But well, I have to say that this video has been to a large extent an inspiration for me when I was preparing my lectures. So there are also some overlaps. Okay, there was a question that I also received via the forum about reading suggestions, if there are going to be any reading suggestions. And for the core lectures, so basically starting from the next one, there will be specific reading suggestions. They will be provided. You will get references and some articles that are not available online freely. So this is something that we will take care of. For my lectures, actually, my recommendation is just to take a look at the numerous references in the slides, because these lectures, they're not focused, so I'm covering a very broad range of topics. So I cannot recommend any 1 or 2 or 3 articles. So just I put the references always in the slides, so you can just explore those that are about the topics that you're interested in. So for instance, if you're looking for a general introduction to linguistic typology, then the handbook by Viveka Vilupillai is a very nice one. And I took something from it for our last lecture. Then if you're interested in language universals, for instance, there is this nice article by Evans and Levinson on the myth of language universals, where they discuss how universals work and what types there are and what might be problematic about them. And for instance, if you're interested in corpus-based typology, which is a rapidly developing field, then I recommend the article by Natalia Levshina, who is one of the leading specialists in this field. So you can also take a look at that. But, well, it all depends on what exactly you are interested in. If you're interested in sampling, for instance, since we have seen it's a popular topic, then you can take a look at the paper by Martin Jestamo and his co-authors. Another thing that I wanted to mention based on our last lecture is that there was a question, a very nice one, after most of you left. So the question was whether linguistic typology is only about grammar, or maybe to some extent also phonology, or if it studies also something else. And actually the answer is it does. And one nice database that is available, it's also on the CLLD platform, is WOLT, the World Loanword Database. So it deals with loan words and how words are borrowed. So it has 41 recipient language, so language into which words are borrowed, and then lots of, so 300 something donor languages, so from which words were borrowed, and then around 1,500 concepts that were or were not borrowed in these languages. And there is all kinds of interesting statistics as to which concepts, which meanings are often borrowed, which are very rarely borrowed. And so this is a very interesting thing to explore if you're interested in lexical studies. Another database that also deals with lexicon is CLIX. So it's a database of cross-linguistic colloquifications. It also has, well, it has very nice visualizations. So it actually shows on a very huge amount of data which meanings are expressed by the same word, by one and the same word in some languages. And there are graphs that show which colloquifications are attested in the languages of the world. So for instance, they are usually built around some meaning. So this is a subgraph for heart, for instance. This is for arm, I think, and this is for eye. But the idea is that the thicker the line is, the more common the colloquification is. So for instance, here we can see that there are a lot of languages that use the same word for hand and arm. Some languages that use the same word for arm and wing, then wing and feather, for instance, and so on. And then heart is often the same word as soul, sometimes the same word as liver, sometimes the same word as lung, and sometimes the same word as inside. So it's kind of a grammaticalized into an adposition or an adverb. And I is colloquified with seed. So this is something that you can explore, and this is also a very interesting branch of linguistic typology. So studies dealing with lexicon. Another option is to study pragmatics, maybe, and to some extent its interaction with phonology. There is a very interesting typological study about huh. Maybe you have heard about it. So it's by Mark Dingemans and his co-authors. And this is a famous study because it actually received an Ig Nobel Prize some around 10 years ago. So this is the prize, which is an alternative to a Nobel Prize for very serious research that is nevertheless, well, that can be funny. So they actually studied this universal item that you use that you are confused or you want to initiate repair. So when someone is asking you a question and you didn't quite get the question, so you're like, huh? And so this group of linguists, they studied this item in a sample of languages, and they found out that it's universal, that it's a word, so it has properties of a verb, some phonological properties that make it a word and so on, then that it's not an involuntary response and that it's likely shaped by convergent evolution. So there are some pressures for the form of the word created by the context. So you basically, it has to be short, it has to sound like a question. And this is why in many languages, even though this huh word is not exactly the same, but it actually is similar. It has similar properties in different languages. So that's also linguistic typology. So it doesn't have to be passive or relative clauses or gender. It doesn't have to be grammar. It can be lots of other things as well. Okay. Do you have any further questions, maybe about last time still, or can we proceed to the topic of our today's lecture? Okay, at least it seems that there are no urgent questions. So I suggest that we proceed to typological explanations. This is what we're going to discuss today. So basically, last time we discussed how much data we already have about different features in the world's languages. And indeed, typologists, they have accumulated a lot of data from numerous languages across the globe. And they have made cross-linguistic generalizations. Some of them are formulated more in synchronic terms, like Greenberg's universal, for instance, that a language never has more gender categories in non-singular numbers than in the singular. So this is what we saw last time. Or they can be formulated in more historical terms, like the one by Biekel over here. In the historical evolution, languages are more likely to maintain and develop non-ergative case marking systems, so the ones that treat S and A intransitive subjects and transitive subjects alike, than ergative case marking systems that split S and A, so where intransitive subjects and transitive subjects are marked differently. And well, a natural next question is, how do we explain the patterns we observe? So we have established that something takes place, that something is true for all or most of the world's languages. So now we are looking for explanations. And probably the most common and the most well-established type of explanations in linguistic typology are functional explanations. So the underlying assumption behind all those explanations is that many aspects of language structure can be explained with reference to language function. So basically, certain structures, they have their own meaning and they are used in a certain way in human communication, which is the main function of language. And this leads to some universal tendencies regarding language structure. So the way those structures function, it shapes them. It actually creates certain patterns that we can then observe. And well, the idea is that speech communities around the world are subject to the same kinds of cognitive and communicative pressures, and the languages they speak tend to develop structures that respond to these pressures accordingly. So the reason why the patterns we observe are universal or almost universal. This is because the way human cognition works is the same across speech communities. And well, functional explanations are not quite homogeneous, so there are different kinds of explanations. There is a very nice and very accessible overview by Lindsay Whaley in the book Introduction to Typology. So he says that all those explanations actually are external explanations in the sense that they are referring to factors or forces, another common word used in typology, that are outside of the linguistic system. So internal explanations are the ones that are similar to the generative explanations that are referring to universal grammar, and they are purely system internal. But while already functional explanations that are common in typology, they are external to the linguistic system as such. And there are 5 types that can be mentioned. So discourse, processing, economy, iconicity, and perception and cognition. There can be more, and sometimes some of these are lumped together and they are also overlapping to some extent, but we will just take a look at these 5 types and see how they have been used in linguistic typology up until now, basically. So when it comes to discourse, one very famous study is the one by John Dubois. It's called The Discourse Basis of Ergativity. So for those of you who are not sure what ergativity is, that's a grammatical pattern in the first place where Intransitive subjects and transitive objects are marked in the same way. And this is absolutive case or absolutive marking. And then the transitive subject is marked differently. This is something that you do not find in most European languages. You almost do not find that in European languages. Basque is an exception, but we know it's an exception to many other tendencies in Europe. So in European languages, we have nominative, which is all the subjects, and accusative, which is object. But ergative pattern is a different one. And the question is, what is the reason behind this pattern? How does it form? How does it develop? And what Dubois suggests is that in addition to the grammatical pattern of ergativity that is observed in some languages, there is also an isomorphic pattern of information flow. So basically, the reason why S and O roles, so intransitive subjects and direct objects, are lumped together in this, and the A role is not, is that, is that new information, so new participants occur preferentially in S or O roles and not in the A role. So basically the information distribution in discourse, if we think of any kind of discourse, narratives, for instance, so information distribution is skewed towards an ergative pattern. And this is a reason why the ergative marking may occur, why ergative participants are lumped together also in grammar. Interestingly, Dubois has shown that not only in grammatically ergative languages, this information distribution pattern is like that, but also in accusative languages. But the reason why in accusative languages, the grammatical marking, the grammatical system alignment is accusative is that there is a competing pattern, and that is topic continuity. So subjects tend to be topics and the other way around. So we usually encode what we are talking about, something that we are talking about, as subjects. So this is why this is a reason to lump the subject together, and that would be nominative versus accusative. But nevertheless, so the explanation for the proposed explanation for ergativity as a grammatical phenomenon is in discourse. And I found this nice quote from Dubois. So he actually writes there, given the precedent of a discourse basis for ergativity and the growing grammatical sophistication of the entire field of discourse analysis, we should not be surprised if in the coming years, more and more of the most fundamental aspects of grammar are revealed as shaped by language use. I wouldn't say that this was the moment, so in 1987, when all the typologists started looking only into language use, but there have indeed been some studies that look into discourse, and generally discourse-based explanations in linguistic typology are still being explored. So this is one domain in which people look for explanations for typological patterns. The second functional explanation is processing, and the main person here is John Hawkins. So that's a book here that you can see. So a performance theory of order and constituency, and he claimed that actually the reason why languages work the way they are is because they try to, well, the speakers try to process information as efficiently as possible. And he proposed several ways how processing, the ease and efficiency of processing can be achieved, to minimize domains in which certain semantic and syntactic relations are processed. So basically, the idea is that you need to be able to process things, to understand things based on a minimal amount of minimal string in speech. Then minimizing forms. So whenever the information, certain information or content is recoverable from the context or some long-term statistical knowledge, then you should just minimize the forms and leave unexpressed whatever can be left unexpressed. And generally, you can make your processing efficient by arranging elements, syntactic elements, in such a way that the message can be transmitted as rapidly and accurately as possible, so without delays, without false predictions, backtracking, and so on. This might sound complicated, and indeed, this is not a very easy read. If you try to take a look at this book, it combines generative approaches with psycholinguistic approaches, with some typological generalizations, and there is a lot going on. So I'll just provide an example to maybe make it easier for you. So if you take a look at this sentence, the first one here, and try to read it and understand it. It's actually from the handbook by Whaley. So the candidate hoped to win the election, lost. It probably takes you some time to see what is actually going on, because, well, it's the candidate that was hoped to win the election, but lost. But what you think first when you try to read this sentence is that the candidate hoped to win the election. This is where you expect the end of this sentence, because your first intention is your first, the first way in which you want to understand this sentence is that hoped is actually the main verb. So it's the predicate here, but it's not. So this is exactly the thing that needs to be avoided. This is exactly what should not happen. So English is an SVO language, so it's more efficient to put the verb right after the subject, and just be done with it, and not to put it in the very end of the sentence and put more things inside. So this is what should be avoided. An important contribution by Hawkins is that actually, well, we saw last time in Greenberg's universals that Greenberg was kind of looking for absolute correlations between different word orders. So like if you have the object after the verb, then you will have other dependencies also after their heads. So it should all be quite uniform. But Hawkins actually allowed for competing motivations. So he was also saying that in terms of processing, harmonic word order is quite beneficial. So it's good to have consistently head final or head initial constructions. But on the other hand, there can be some other principles, for instance, a heavy constituent principle. And it says that heavy constituents are easy. Well, it's more easy to process them if you put them after their heads. So dependents, heavy constituent dependents, are easy to process if they go after their heads. So for instance, relative clauses are a very good example of that. So relative clauses are heavy constituents. They consist of many individual items. So it's in terms of processing, it's good to have them after nouns. And if we take a look at a map over here, which is an overlap of two maps in walls, you can do that. So technically, that's a very nice solution. So this is a combination of two maps, so OV versus VO word order, and noun relative clause versus relative clause noun. And you can see that probably the most common type here is where you have VO languages that have noun relative clause word order. So this is harmonic word order because you have the head first, verb or noun, and then object and relative clause, so the dependents come after. So this is a harmonic word order, and it also obeys the heavy constituent principle that the relative clause comes after. But then when we deal with OV word order, it turns out that those black and white dots, the number of these dots, it's almost equal. Because for OV word order, the harmonic word order would be relative clause before the noun. But we know that it does not go together with the heavy constituent principle. So this is why many languages that have OV word order, so had final word order, they still prefer the order where the noun is before the relative clause, so those white dots over there. While on the other hand, it does not happen with VO languages. So VO languages with the order relative clause noun, there are just, well, a bunch of them over here, but it's not that common. So this is like looking into this kind of generalization in more detail and proposing competing explanations. This might explain some of the patterns that we observe that are not quite in line with what we see if we approach that from Greenberg's perspective, for instance. Okay, then the next motivation is the next functional explanation is economy. So there are actually two subtypes here. So the first claim in the domain of economy is that elements in language that are highly predictable in context tend to be eliminated. And the second one is that elements that are used commonly tend to be reduced. So basically, economy, the word, it speaks for itself. The idea is that languages want to leave unexpressed whatever it can be left unexpressed. And this principle has been used to explain markedness patterns in morphology. So for instance, the hierarchy, the markedness hierarchy for number that we already saw last time, that singular is the least marked, and then plural is more often marked, or if both are marked, then plural involves a larger number of morphemes, or at least the same number of morphemes as the singular, and then dual and trial or paucal number, so they are even more marked. Well, singular is more common than plural. This is why it tends to be reduced, and it's also highly predictable. So because it's so common, so you don't actually need to express it overtly. You don't need to mark it overtly. And if you can leave it unmarked, then you will. So that is what the economy principle tells us. And some other phenomena that have been explained by economy are broad drop languages. So basically languages that do not use pronominal subjects because they have verbal inflection, for instance. So this is what Spanish or Finnish do, for instance. So in English, you cannot omit the subject I, or, well, any other subject, for instance. But in some other languages, you can. Again, because this is expressed elsewhere. So this is redundant, and the language simply decides to leave it out. Also, the second subclaim, so that elements that are used commonly tend to be reduced, it accounts for the development of elements in English like wanna and gonna. So want to or going to, they are so common, they are used so often that they economically become smaller, and they become shorter. So this is what happens with elements that are very common or very frequent. So that's what economy principle suggests. Then the motivation which is often seen as competing to economy because, well, it's to some extent, its idea is to make certain things more explicit, is iconicity. One statement, one generalization that has been explained by iconicity is the following. That's suggested by, well, one of the claims discussed in this context by John Heyman. In no language will the phonological expression of inalienable possession be bulkier than that of alienable possession. So basically, in some languages in the world, there are two types of possession, and inalienable possession, well, that's a construction. So that's the situation where you speak of something that belongs to you inherently, and it's like you need to possess it. Like, for instance, body parts or kinship terms are often used with a construction of inalienable possession because, well, if someone is a brother, he's always someone's brother. So for those items, inalienable possession is used. And for everything else, something that you can easily buy, transfer, lose, another construction is used because this is alienable possession. So something that you can alienate. And the idea is that inalienable possession, so this is a more tight relationship. So this is why the expression should be more, well, should be shorter, or it should iconically represent the tightness of this relationship. So, for instance, in Hua language from the nuclear Trans-New Guinea family, there is a distinction between my pig and my arm. So you can see that my pig is alienable possession, and here my is expressed with a separate word. So this possessive pronoun is a full word. But when you say my arm, then my is actually a prefix. And the same works for your axe, and which is alienable possession. So this is why you have a separate word. And in your thigh or your lap, again, since this is a body part, this is an alienable possession. So this is why you express it with a prefix. So this is one way how it can be manifested. So simply a shorter form. Then in Papago, a U.2 language, again, you have a distinction between Huan's tribe, so the tribe that Huan owns, probably bought it at the market. You have to have a genitive marker, and then a classifier, and then yet another genitive marker, because this is alienable possession, but with the same word, meaning gut, when you're talking about the cow's gut, so that's part of the cow's body, then this second part, second genitive and the classifier, they are not necessary. So again, inalienable possession, body parts, kinship terms is expressed in a shorter form, because there the connection is more obvious, so to say. So this is supposed to be iconic. So language reflects the situation or the cognitive perception of reality in a way. And then the last explanation, which still belongs to this functional domain, is referring to perception or cognition. And actually, I think some of you mentioned Berlin and Kay's study when registering for this course, so you will probably be happy to see it. So there is this study of basic color terms and their universality and evolution by Berlin and Kay. So they suggested that the color terms develop in the languages of the world in a certain order. And there is also an implication of universal that if a language only has two colors, so only one distinction, that will be distinction between black and white or dark and light. And then if there is another color term, the third one, it will be red. And then when the next one appears, it's either yellow or green, and then the next one is blue, and so on. So basically, this is a typological study, and this is a generalization about the order of basic color terms, the hierarchy of basic color terms that is made on a sample of languages. And 10 years after this first study appeared, there was another study by Kay and McDaniel that showed that this hierarchy is actually grounded in human anatomy. So it's about how our visual system works. So when you expose a person to black and white colors, so exposure produces maximally distinctive responses. The response is as different as it can be when you're exposed to black and white, and then red is next in this respect, and so on. So actually, it follows this hierarchy quite neatly. So this means that actually this typological generalization that we can make based on a sample of languages, it is grounded in how humans simply perceive color. So this is again explaining this with some cognitive abilities. So it's external to language system. So these are functional explanations. Languages tend to behave in a certain way, and this way is supposed to be beneficial for the language to be functioning, basically. But this is all fairly synchronic still, even though we refer to those attractor states, so some states of human languages that are attractive. So that's a term from evolutionary biology. So languages try to be like that in very simple words. So even though we refer to this development, actually we do not really look into diachrony. But maybe some around 10 years ago, or now a little bit more, there has been a growing interest towards proper diachronic explanations. In linguistic typology, there is a very nice volume, which consists of several articles where different researchers actually present their view on diachronic explanations and generally explanation in linguistic typology and the nature of evidence. It's not a very easy read, but if you're interested in the topic, then I can recommend it. The idea behind those diachronic explanations in the most radical view is that the explanations proposed for given distributional patterns, so synchronic patterns, should refer to diachronic processes that give rise to these patterns, and not to the functions of the patterns themselves, and not to the driving forces, but it's all about diachrony, because basically every synchronic distribution that we have is a result of certain diachronic processes. So we just need to pay attention to those and leave everything else aside. There is also a more moderate view. So this one is advocated mostly by Sonia Christoforou. So she's probably the most well-known representative of this view. A more moderate view is that the diachronic processes can be regarded as a very valuable source of evidence for particular principles that might motivate certain observed linguistic phenomena. So kind of we are still interested maybe in the functional forces that drive language change, but we need to really pay attention to specific diachronic patterns that we know of. Of course, this is quite often a very tricky issue because for many languages, we do not know their diachrony that well. But nevertheless, whenever diachronic evidence is available, this is a very good source and a very good way to explain synchronic patterns. So one example of that is, well, again, if we continue speaking about word order correlations, then we know that there is this correlation that if languages have VO word order, so where the object follows the verb, then these languages also have the order auxiliary verb plus lexical verb. And well, we can try and explain that by certain functional pressures, or maybe we might say that languages try to make processing as efficient as possible and thus try to establish harmonic word order. But there is a diachronic way to look into this. So auxiliaries basically normally grammaticalize from main verbs. This is a fairly well-known fact. And these main verbs take other verbs as complements. And if those languages are VO languages that or had initial languages, that means that these complements that those main verbs take, they follow the verb. So basically, what we will have as a result of a diachronic development when a main verb grammaticalizes into an auxiliary verb is the auxiliary plus verb construction. So where the auxiliary verb will come first. And it will be exactly the other way around in languages that have verb final OV word order. So verbs will take other verbs as complements, then they grammaticalize, and we get verb, lexical verb plus auxiliary verb word order. So basically the difference between those two types of explanations is that the hardcore functional explanations are interested in attractor states. So they are result-oriented explanations. Languages want to get to a certain point. So this is why they develop in a certain way. While diachronic explanations are more interested in the so-called attractor trajectories. So basically, we are interested in recurrent patterns that occur in diachrony, and they lead to certain results. And what Christopher emphasizes in her work is that quite often what we observe, so some kind of synchronic distribution, it is a result of so many different processes and certain things, they can come to one and the same state following many different trajectories. So basically, there is no point in postulating some driving functional forces, but rather we just need to look into what happens historically in languages. Well, this is still kind of looking into explanations of synchronic patterns in terms of what is possible and what leads there, how those things arise. And indeed, what's possible and possibly also why, it used to be the main question in linguistic typology for several decades. Until and then there was an additional avenue of investigation, another typological paradigm, so to say, which is usually called what's, where, why. And this is what, well, the discussion of the paradigm, probably the best known article in which it was discussed is the one by Balthasar Bickel from 2007. So this is a new question, and this is an interest towards linguistic diversity in a very broad sense. So we are not just interested in universal patterns or most common patterns, but generally we are genuinely interested in how diversity works in the world. So what's where? This part of the question, it targets universal preferences as much as geographical or genealogical skewings, and results in probabilistic theories stated over properly sampled distributions. So we are interested how diversity is distributed across the globe, both in terms of geography and genealogy. And then why is the second part of this question, and it is based on the premises that typological distributions are historically grown. So again, we are interested in how they developed. And also they are interrelated with other distributions, which is a very important point. And well, for instance, we already saw this map last time. So this is a map from Walls, which shows the distribution of tone in the world's languages. So we can see that quite a lot of languages in the world have no tones whatsoever. And well, even more importantly, there are quite a lot of areas in the world where tone is completely unattested or very rarely attested. So basically most of Eurasia, for instance, except for Southeast Asia, is this kind of area, or then tone is not very common in the Americas, but it's very common in Africa. So we can see that there is a certain distribution, geographical distribution, which is obviously not random. And of course, this causes, well, this encourages us to ask questions. Why is this the way it is? And indeed, in recent years, so maybe in the last 10 years or so, there has been a growing interest towards various factors that are completely external to language or human cognition that might influence the patterns that we see in the distribution of certain linguistic features. For instance, environmental factors. So this is a study by Caleb Everett and co-authors. So what they are interested in is the interaction between tone and climate. And the idea is that they looked into some findings from laryngology. Quite often those studies are very multidisciplinary. So basically you need to know a lot in order to study those issues and in order to explain those issues. So the findings from laryngology are that even brief exposure to desiccated air can negatively impact precise phonation by increased rates of jitter, so the pitch would be imprecise, and of shimmer, so varying amplitude. So this means that basically if the air is too dry, then it's hard to produce tones very neatly, very accurately. And the result of this, as they claim in typology, is that languages with complex tonality, so with complex tonal systems, they have generally not developed in very cold or otherwise desiccated climates. So when it's too cold or while the air is too dry, generally, then tonal languages are not likely to develop. So they show it on a large sample of languages. They get data on, well, linguistic data and then extra-linguistic data, so on the environmental factors, and they analyze the two sets of data and see if there are any correlations. And that's what they claim, that indeed complex tonality does not develop in cold or desiccated climates. And indeed, well, that basically can just to some extent reflect our intuition. So we see, yeah, so most of the languages are with complex tonal systems are somewhere in relatively hot and humid areas. Actually, most of these studies, since this is all very recent, there is quite a lot of controversy around many of these studies. And for instance, well, maybe 1 year or 2 years after that article appeared, there was another one. So there was a response by Harald Hammarström, who criticizes the methods and the results of the study by Everett, and says that actually there is no demonstrable effect of desiccation. So what he writes is, the present commentator argues that the theoretical motivation is too sweeping and that the empirical part referred to is problematic from start to finish. The statistical treatment of the empirical data on tonality and humidity fails to rule out the classical areal and genealogical confounds, as well as statistical orthodoxy. So I'm not going to go into detail, but the main, probably, well, the most crucial point of criticism is that they did not take genealogical and areal factors into account. And basically, it might simply be that if we take them into account, if we consider not all those languages individually, but as members of language families, then it might be that one language there and one language here, proto-language, developed a tonal system, and then it just spread to all the late languages that developed later. So in that sense, he shows that probably this is not a very reliable study. Okay, another study that also took into account environmental, or rather in this case, geographical factors, is a study again by Everett, which showed or tried to show the connection between adjectives and altitude. So adjective consonants are those consonants when you pronounce them, there is an airflow from the upper part of the glottal tract. So quick release. So something like I'm very bad at that, but well, I'm doing my best. So those adjective consonants, they are not very common in the languages of the world. So you can see, hopefully, that there are some areas where they are common. So here in North America, then there are some hotspots in Africa, then another hotspot is in the Caucasus. And the proposal by Everett is that those adjective consonants are actually, they occur closer to inhabitable regions of high elevation. So they occur in the mountains, there is a visible statistically significant correlation between the elevation and the presence of adjective consonants. And the tentative explanation is that adjective sounds might be, so their pronunciation might be facilitated at high elevations due to the associated decrease in ambient air pressure. So somehow it should be easier to pronounce them when the air pressure is lower. So this is why they develop. Again, there has been some criticism. So there is a relatively recent study from 2021 by Matthias Urban and Stephen Moran. So they show that actually adjectives are not the only class of typological unusual sounds that occur in higher altitudes. So uvulars, something like r. So what you basically this French kind of r and other similar sounds that are produced with the help or near the uvula. So this small thing. Yeah. So and uvulars are have a distribution that is very similar to that of adjectives, but the proposed explanations about air pressure, they do not really apply to them. So there should be some other explanation. And actually, they tried to they made a phylogenetic exploration of the development of both classes of sounds, so adjectives and uvulars, in two large language families, so Indo-European and Sino-Tibetan. And actually, they showed that it's most likely not about altitude, but rather there is a very strong evidence in favor of language contact rather than environmental factors. So it's due to language contact that those consonants spread to specific areas, and the evidence in favor of environmental factors is not conclusive. Then one recent study that has not been disproved yet, either because it's more solid or because it's more recent, is this one. So again, we are dealing with environmental factors, and this time they are sonority and temperature. So sonority here, it's a very complex measure. So basically, the authors developed a whole scale. So the most sonorant sounds are vowel. So basically, like where you use your voice most. So vowels, then semi-vowels, then all kinds of consonants up to voiceless consonants. So they have this scale, but basically, well, if we really want to make it simple, so the more voice you use and the more vowels you have, the higher the degree of sonority in a language. And the idea is that the lower the temperature, so lower temperatures in where the language is formed, they lead to decreased sonority. And indeed, if we want to take a look at some anecdotic evidence, so we have two languages here. The first one is Nunalk, so that's the Salishan language spoken in Canada. And here we have Hawaiian and Austronesian languages spoken in Hawaii. And if you just try to compare those languages, you will see that over here in Nunalk, you have lots of consonants. I'm not going to try to pronounce this, but well, you can see that there are lots of consonants here, and it's indeed spoken in a colder climate. And then Hawaiian is actually an example of a language which has lots of vowels, many of them, and the syllable structure is that so that it has to be always open and end in a vowel. So yeah, and yet it's a much warmer climate. So of course, this is just anecdotic evidence, but they actually ran a very solid analysis. And here the bluer dots are the ones with the low sonority. The pinkish dots are the ones with higher sonority. And it is supposed to reflect also, well, it correlates with temperatures over there. So basically, again, there are some explanations proposed to that, but in very simple words, the colder it is around you, the more you prefer to keep your mouth shut and not maybe to inhale too much, and so on. So basically, this is one of the explanations. There are some others that basically if you if it's cold around you, then you spend a lot of time inside, and this means that you communicate at smaller distances. So this is why you don't need to be too loud or too sonorant. But well, actually, all of those studies are very interesting, and they have very accessible summaries. So if you're interested, then you have all the references here, and I recommend that you take a look at them on your own. Then one other study, again, a relatively recent one, is on the influence of dietary and behavioral practices on the consonant inventory. So the idea here is that some consonants, specifically labiodental sounds such as f and v, which are, as we already know from last time, which are not found in all the world's languages. So they developed in the communities, in the societies that were affected by post-Neolithic changes, namely well, again, in a nutshell, the food became softer. So when people started processing food, then it became beneficial to switch from the edge-to-edge model. So when your teeth are actually like that, so they stand next to one another, and when humans switched to the overjet or overbite model, then the accidental pronunciation of labiodentals, things like f and v, became more common. So basically, this is reflected by the distribution of hunter-gatherer communities and food producers, and where you have hunter-gatherer societies, there are lots of languages with no labiodentals, and with food producers, you actually have a lot of, well, languages mostly have labiodentals. So again, how dietary and behavioral practices can influence the consonant inventory. So that's a very, very external explanation, so to say, and something that we might be interested in. One thing to keep in mind is that we said already last time that for linguistic typology, it's very important to compare unrelated languages. So we are moving away from the historical comparative method, and we want to focus on the structural features. So the role of genealogy is kind of not so important to us. Actually, when we are addressing linguistic diversity and the distribution of linguistic diversity and many structural features as well, recent findings show that the role of genealogy is actually extremely important. So there is this nice article. I think it's a linguistic article with the largest number of authors that I know of. It's a quantitative study based on GramBank. So when the GramBank database was launched, there appeared also this article that analyzed GramBank and showed what it can tell us about linguistic diversity in the world. And actually, they checked, the authors checked the relative importance of phylogeny or genealogy, and language contact, and, well, areality, and they showed that actually, as predictor, phylogeny is much better than space, so than geography. And the modern patterns of linguistic diversity are mostly shaped by genealogical inheritance, rather than geographical diffusion. So even though in language context some very salient features can arise, but nevertheless, it's not the most important factor, and the basic structures still are very much due to genealogy. Yeah, so that was a very brief overview of different factors and explanations that have been used in linguistic typology. And as you know, in this course, we are mostly interested in sociolinguistic explanations and sociolinguistic approaches. And next time, Anne-Marie is going to talk to you about quantitative approaches. But I would like to mention some earlier accounts that looked into sociolinguistic factors in the development of languages. So I will just briefly mention them now. A subdiscipline that deals with it is called sociolinguistic typology. And a very important person here is Peter Trotgill. He actually wrote this handbook chapter that you have a reference to here, which is one of my favorite handbook chapters ever, because it reads like a detective story. We'll just quickly take a look at it, but I definitely recommend that you read it at some point on your own. So sociolinguistic typology generally examines the possibility that different types of language structure, so structural properties, may be associated with different types of society or social structure. So that means that we are not taking function or diachrony or environment, physical environment as explanation, but we are looking into society and societal structure. And there have been some interdependent parameters proposed and discussed in earlier literature, like small versus large community size, dense versus loose social networks, social stability versus instability, and high versus low degree of shared information. But one important factor is the degree of contact versus isolation. So how much contact is there and how it influences linguistic structure. And there is some evidence that shows that language contact actually leads to complexification. And here, well, generally, linguistic complexity is a very complex term and a very complex concept. We are not going to look into that right now because we do not have the time. But generally, well, linguistic complexity is the number of elements involved and the number of rules involved. So just let's take this intuitively as, well, in many cases where it's going to be about morphological complexity anyway. For instance, well, one obvious reason why contact may lead to complexification is additive change. So new features from neighboring languages, they do not replace existing features, but they are acquired in addition to them. So that means that the more contact you have, the more additive complexity you get. And also pioneering study by Johanna Nichols, where she studied, she had a very elaborate way of calculating morphological complexity in a sample of 174 languages, so across the world. And she showed that in spread zones, for instance, Western Europe, where the genetic diversity is not so high, and then there is always some kind of lingua franca, and generally languages are not that much in hardcore contact with one another. There is lower complexity, and in so-called residual zones with high genetic density, there is higher complexity. So that's like in the Caucasus, for instance. Also, there are some individual examples, like, for instance, Tariana, an Arawak language spoken in Amazonia, is the only Arawak language that was in long-term contact with Eastern Tucanoan languages, a different family. And it developed lots of things like case marking for core syntactic functions, five-way system of evidentials. So it became extremely complex due to language contact. Or then Yimas, Alamblak, and Enga, languages in Papua New Guinea, developed switch reference systems as a result of language contact. So they borrowed a lot from each other, and that led to complexification. Sometimes also replacement borrowing, where a more inherently complex feature develops or is borrowed into a language, is possible. So it's the case of borrowing in Europe, where the apical r turned into an uvular r. So this is something extending from France to Norway, where according to Trudgill, the change is still ongoing, depending on different dialects. So it can also be seen as complexification, because uvular articulation types are much rarer than alveolar, so apical. So that means that there is some inherent complexity going on. On the other hand, there is evidence that language contact can also lead to simplification. So for instance, if we take a look at contact languages like pidgins on creoles and koinas, which are dialects used as lingua franca, then we will see that they show relatively low morphological complexity. They can be complex in other domains, but their morphological complexity is often quite low. And then and they are contact languages, so that's kind of obvious that the main hypothesis is that this is exactly due to contact. And also in the development of individual languages, we see that with the increase of contact, languages might simplify. So this is what happened to Old English as it developed into Middle English. There was a lot of regularization of irregularities and increase in transparency. We know that in English, in modern English, there are still some irregular plural forms, but many of them actually disappeared. So the plural of cow used to be kine, and now it's cows, and it's more regular, which decreases complexity and makes things more simple. And it's more transparent because you have the stem and you have a plural suffix. And well, in other cases, generally, as a result of contact, as it has been shown in individual studies, there is loss of redundancy going on. So morphological categories can be lost, like dual number is lost in some Arabic varieties. And in Norwegian, for instance, you normally have agreement in number with predicative adjectives. So we are tired, for instance, but in Norwegian, in Bergen, which has been in contact with Low German, as a result of contact, this just disappeared. That's the claim in a specific study that dealt with this topic. So basically, contact obviously in many cases leads to simplification. So that's another example. Generally, it has been observed that in Scandinavian languages, the insular languages, they remained quite complex, well, in terms of their morphology, while continental languages became simplified. So this is what we can see in the development from Old Swedish to modern Swedish. So this is the paradigm from Old Swedish. This is from modern Swedish. A lot of complexity has been lost. So this is claimed to be due to language contact. So basically, the question is, does language contact lead to complexification or to simplification? So that's a conundrum. And Trudgill actually argues that instead of asking this question, we need to ask another one. Namely, we need to ask which language contact linked societal factors lead to complexification and which to simplification. So not all language content is the same, and we need to look more into the sociolinguistic situation. And it turns out that the crucial thing is who does the learning and under what circumstances. So it has been shown that humans learn the language much better until a certain age. So learning a language is much easier for kids than it is for adults. And there is a term which is controversial itself, but nevertheless, it's relevant here. So the term of critical threshold, basically that's the age where your ability changes dramatically, your ability to acquire a new language. And it has also been shown by studies on language acquisition in deaf communities that the earlier a person is exposed to sign language, the easier the acquisition is. And so basically, complexification is a result of language contact, which occurs when you have a stable and long-term language contact, which involve childhood bilingualism. So where it's mostly children acquiring the language. So in smaller communities, this is what happened in Tariana, for instance, so in the Amazon, in Papua New Guinea with Alam Black and Enga and Yimas, and so on. So kids are proficient in the language from the very beginning, and that leads to complexification because they are actually able to acquire language in full. On the other hand, if we are dealing with post-critical threshold, non-native language learning, so adult language learning, second language learning, then it leads to simplification. And this is what happened in most cases that we observed, like in many Romance languages or Germanic languages that are now morphologically more simple than they used to be at their earliest stages. Trudgill also says that probably actually this kind of language contact is mostly a modern phenomenon, so post-Neolithic, associated with the last 2000 years. So it's more typical for older communities to have this stable co-territorial contact situation. So that means that actually contact can lead both to complexification and simplification, but it depends on specific features of the contact situation. So the outcomes can be very different. So we need to look into sociolinguistics. And this is what we're going to do next time. So just as a reminder, our next lecture is going to be on Friday, from 2 to 3:30. So this is the only lecture in the course which is not in the evening, but in the afternoon here in Central Europe. So Anne-Marie Fakiak is going to talk about quantitative approaches to sociolinguistic typology. So I have shown you some preliminaries here, but you can expect more of this in the next lecture. And again, the same task as usual. I will ask you to submit your take-home messages from the session. And here is a link. It's already available on the webpage. And yeah, so most of you already know how to do that. Please do that in the next 24 hours. Again, it's obligatory for active participants who want credits for this course, but it's optional for passive participants. But of course, the more take-home messages we have, the better. And that's it. So I hope to see you on Friday, starting from 1:45 to 2.